And we're going to watch several videos today because they spell it out faster and better than I ever could, and with better graphics. So the Palestinian issue is a problem for every nation around Israel. Egypt is on the verge of financial collapse. They could no more take in 1.5 million people than fly to the moon. It would collapse their entire economy. Jordan is the same way. I didn't realize this, but Jordan is a refugee state. They have refugees from Sudan, from all over the Middle East, and from other parts of Africa, and they're just teetering on the edge because they can't financially support all these refugees. So we're going to be talking about it. Egypt basically says, you know, Israel, if your operations fall over the line into the Sinai Peninsula, which they gave back in the Camp David Accords in 1979, the whole treaty's null and void. So I thought about this. I was like, oh my gosh, Jimmy Carter's still alive. He's going to see the undoing of this treaty before he dies, because it's that close to happening. Because will Egypt let any of the Palestinians into their country? No, it's a solid wall. And you got about 2 million people now in the southern part of the Gaza Strip trying to escape. Some estimate that it is the most densely populated area on Earth. I find that hard to believe compared to Singapore, but that's one of the things that they claim. So what I wanted to get to, I don't know if I've gotten to it. Yes.
It said this week that Israel told them to get out of Rafah, or whatever the town is called. Where are they supposed to go? There's nowhere left to go.
So this is a big issue. So the United Kingdom and the United States have secretly met with Egypt and was like, look, we'll cancel all your debt if you just set up a refugee camp in Sinai. Why doesn't Egypt want to do that? That's one huge one. The Perry's is great. Walter has something in the back, but that's absolutely right. It's like, you want to bring them in? What's going to happen when the war is over? You're going to take them back? And they're not going to take them back. So, yes.
Then, after it's all settled and done, they'll say, hey, we need a land for ourselves, an independent state. Next thing you know, they're saying, hey, let me have this part of Egypt down here.
Right, exactly. So it's a very serious situation, and it keeps getting worse for everybody involved because they can't take these guys. The other issue is that Egypt doesn't want to look weak in front of their other Arab state nations. They'll seem like they kowtowed just to pay off their debt because they're so deeply in debt. So it is, you can see why the 10 toes of, you know, iron and clay is today. They're just weak and strong nations, and the weak ones are going to bring the strong ones down. What is it said about how strong a chain is? It's only as strong as, right. So it doesn't matter how much iron you got. If you got clay, and that's part of your chain, as Aretha Franklin said, change of fools. So it's not going to work out very well at all. So this is a little bit long. I'm going to try to stop it when I can. This was the best explanation of why these countries are doing what they're doing. It was like, it sort of rips off the veil so you can understand politically, economically, why they're motivated to do the things they do. And it includes the stuff about the Houthi and all the other pieces. What I like the most, and this is just the geek in me, he compares them all to chess pieces. This one's the rook, this one's the pawn, this one's the queen, this one's the king, this one's the knight. And you're like, wow, he understands this. So I hope the volume's okay.
This video was made possible by Nebula. Use the link down in the description below to support Real Life Lore directly by signing up, where you can watch dozens of additional
I don't want all the advertising. Let me stop here. Okay.
23. Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups within the Gaza Strip launched a devastating surprise attack on Israel that killed more than 1,200 Israelis and took more than 200 more as hostages. In the aftermath of that attack, Israel issued a formal declaration of war against Hamas, mobilized more than 300,000 soldiers from their reserves, ordered the evacuation of all Israeli civilians from around the Gaza Strip, and initiated a complete land, sea, and air blockade of the Gaza Strip itself that has restricted food, fuel, water, and medical supplies from getting in. From there, the war has been carried out in a series of phases from the Israeli perspective. In the first phase, the Israeli Air Force initiated a punishing 3-week-long aerial bombing campaign across the entire Gaza Strip, with the stated aims of destroying Hamas's infrastructure and giving Israel's own troops enough time to assemble and prepare for the upcoming ground invasion that was aimed at toppling Hamas's government in the Gaza Strip. Israel then ordered that the entire population in the northern section of the Gaza Strip be evacuated. And then on October 27th, the Israelis began the second phase of the war, a full-scale ground invasion into the northern Gaza Strip that they had ordered to be evacuated. Their strategy was to use the invasion to slice the Gaza Strip into two, push as many Palestinian civilians as possible towards the south, and attack isolated Hamas forces encircled in the north. As of this video's production, this second phase of Israel's war is beginning to wrap up, with Israeli military control largely secured across most of the northern Gaza Strip, and Gaza City itself rendered to a shattered ghost town. And already, the consequences for the Palestinians within the Gaza Strip have been absolutely catastrophic. The Hamas-run Gazan Health Ministry has reported that more than 14,000 Palestinians within the Gaza Strip have died since the war began, a statistic that represents the deaths of more than 1 in every 200 people who had lived there. And among those deaths include at least 5,500 children, a fact that makes the current conflict the deadliest war for children that has been fought in modern history. Around 1.5 million Palestinians, or about 70% of the Gaza Strip's population, have been internally displaced from their homes amidst the heavy fighting in the north of the Strip, and they have nearly all been pushed together into the southern end of the Strip, an area that was already, even before the war, one of the most densely populated places on the planet, and which is now arguably the single most densely packed place in the entire world.
So everybody uses the Palestinians as a pawn, because they're saying, oh, Israel, that you have to create this two-state solution. Nobody's giving any humanitarian aid, and they're not providing a place for them to give that or to leave that area. Nobody will take them, not Egypt, not Jordan, not Saudi Arabia, not Yemen, not any of these places. So it's creating a huge humanitarian crisis, yes, but nobody's really willing to help. But they are willing to blame Israel for everything. So when they say so many kids have died in this, I'm like, a lot of that is because of the bombings and all the treatment of the Hamas. Their tunnels go right up through children's daycare centers and through hospitals and children's hospitals, and it's just like you're hiding behind your civilian population. Yes, Perry.
Middle Eastern refugees were fleeing into Europe, but that hasn't worked out well for Europe. Has there been any talk at all of any of these people going to Europe?
No, not as far as I know. I mean, the best solution would be to keep them right next door to where they lived. So the Sinai Peninsula is one of the least populated places on Earth, and it's only got 600,000 residents. And so they're like, let's put up, a couple refugee camps here so that Israel can finish their Hamas sweep. But the problem is Hamas hides out inside of their own population, and they don't care about their own population. They're only there to drain the resources away from them. And you're going to see in another video, every bit of humanitarian aid has smuggled weapons and all this other junk into Israel, into the Gaza Strip to go up against Israel. So it's just a non-stop.
As they have nowhere else to go beyond Israel and Egypt's blockade and the Mediterranean Sea. And now, with the northern Gaza Strip largely secured by the Israeli military, Israel is contemplating when to initiate their third phase of the war, expanding the ground invasion towards the southern Gaza Strip and securing total control over the entire area. But this next phase will be fraught with incredible dangers. Hamas is believed to operate a vast and complex network of tunnels, hundreds of kilometers long beneath the entire Gaza Strip, a system that has sometimes been referred to as the Gaza Metro. Hamas's chief political leader still residing in the Gaza Strip, Yahya Sinwar, is believed to currently be hiding somewhere in these tunnels beneath his hometown of Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip, along with a significant number of the hostages that were seized on October 7th. And so, in order to
Okay, so they also can't make any further progress on the hostage thing because where is this guy, the leader of Hamas? Nobody can find him. So the agreement was, working with Qatar, working with all these other governments, they would negotiate, between Hamas and Israel to get this done. He's nowhere to be found. So they can't really even make any decisions about what to do with the hostages or how to exchange hostages or do a ceasefire because the guy's missing. Nobody can find him. So it's like your general abandoning everybody on the front.
To fully destroy Hamas and rescue all of their hostages, the two primary stated war aims of the Israelis, they will have to eventually invade the southern Gaza Strip too and do something about all of the tunnels. But doing so in this extremely crowded urban environment is almost certainly going to get extremely ugly and result in even higher Palestinian civilian casualties than even before as well. And when they invade the southern Gaza Strip, Israel will also become very vulnerable on other fronts. And there are already troubling signs emerging that the war could end up rapidly escalating away from immediately around Gaza and towards a greater cataclysmic Middle Eastern wide war. In many cases, the geopolitical pieces have already been put into place to fight one. Let's begin by visiting the country that is immediately to the west of the Gaza Strip, Egypt. So far, Egypt has continued keeping their side of the border with the Gaza Strip sealed during Israel's invasion, and has largely refused to allow the vast majority of people across it. If this situation continues to persist by the time Israel expands their invasion into the southern Gaza Strip, then millions of Palestinian civilians will effectively have nowhere to go, caught between the Israeli army, the sealed Egyptian border, and the Mediterranean Sea. There has been rampant speculation about...
So Randy, you asked that question earlier. There's no place to go. There's no place to hide. Yes, Perry. Oh, yeah. So say that. That comes to me from Proverbs and the rest of it, and from Psalms and David's things where he says, let their plans come back upon their heads. So go ahead. I just love it.
Well, that's their war cry, is to push Israel into the sea, and here they are up against the sea.
Yeah, they've got no place to go, and Egypt won't let one person through the border. They don't want any of them.
What Israel's ultimate intentions are for the more than 2 million Palestinians who will become trapped in this scenario. A paper published a week after Hamas's attack on the 13th of October by a department within Israel's intelligence ministry recommended that the entire civilian population of Gaza, some 2 million people, be evacuated across the border into Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Shortly afterwards, the paper was leaked to the public, and the Israeli government was quick to insist that the paper has no actual basis or influence on official policy. Nonetheless, Israeli diplomats have apparently privately proposed a similar idea to multiple governments to transfer at least several 100,000 Palestinians into the Sinai as the war in the Gaza Strip continues. But Egypt's government, led by Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, meanwhile, has resoundingly rejected that this will ever happen. The Sinai Peninsula itself is largely an uninhabitable desert and is very sparsely populated, with only 600,000 Egyptian residents, compared to 2.2 million Palestinians who live in the Gaza Strip. Relocating all of them into the Sinai would result...
Look at the size of that. It's crazy. So if I were going back in time and I were part of the 78 Camp David Accords, I would have said, sure, I'll give you this land back if you take all the Palestinians with it, and put them in the Sinai, because they've instead become a huge problem to Israel instead of being a problem to another nation. So they gave the land back, but not the problem back. And that's why I think it's so interesting when you look at this, 600,000 versus 2.5 million.
In more than a 4-fold increase in the peninsula's population. And Egypt simply doesn't have the resources or the infrastructure in place to accommodate that many people there all at once. Egypt was already teetering on the economic brink even before this new crisis started, with a debt-to-GDP ratio that has ballooned to nearly 93%, as the country continues to spend lavishly on constructing its brand new capital city just to the east of Cairo. Accepting millions of refugees in an underdeveloped part of the country, then, could obviously strain the country's troubled finances even further. Moreover, el-Sisi's government in Egypt is also staunchly opposed to Hamas as an organization. After all, Hamas was originally founded as the Palestinian offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood Organization, an Islamist organization that has its roots in Egypt.
So tell me about the Muslim Brotherhood. How did this organization Hamas come right out of the Muslim Brotherhood? Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, it's a huge threat to any stable government. And so these are all interconnected, but I'll
Egypt,
finish
and the
it up.
organization that found its way to power in Egypt briefly between 2012 and 2013, before el-Sisi and the Egyptian military overthrew them during a coup d'etat. Ever since then, el-Sisi outlawed the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and has been struggling to contain an armed Islamist insurgency opposed to his rule that has been thriving in the geographically remote and rugged interior of the Sinai Peninsula. The various Islamist insurgents operating within the Sinai Peninsula have been able to smuggle weapons and militants back and forth with their fellow Islamists who rule in the Gaza Strip, Hamas, which is why el-Sisi's Egypt has been so enthusiastic about maintaining their side of the blockade of Gaza. More than 3,000 Egyptian soldiers have died fighting against the insurgency in the Sinai ever since it began in 2011. And now, one of el-Sisi's most pressing fears is that if millions of Palestinians evacuate from the Gaza Strip into the Sinai, there may be hundreds or even thousands of Hamas militants traveling among them who could greatly exacerbate the Sinai insurgency.
So do you all get this? If they let go of the Palestinians into Egypt, what's going to happen? I'm sorry? Yeah, and they'll join up with these other groups that are already embedded in the Sinai Peninsula that Egypt can't control. They can't control Al-Qaeda and the IS in the Sinai province, and it'll just grow all over again. And they can't control it as it is now. So it's a huge threat to Egypt.
All over again. Moreover, Palestinians forced out from their homes in Gaza may decide to attack Israel in the future from Egyptian territory within the Sinai, which has the potential to directly bring Egypt into conflict with Israel in the future. El-Sisi himself has expressed his concerns that any allegedly temporary evacuation of Palestinians from Gaza into the Sinai could easily transform into a permanent resettlement after the fact, which would symbolize the final liquidation of the Palestinian cause in Gaza once and for all. There have been some discussions made about Israel and/or the United States agreeing to pay off significant amounts of Egypt's government debt in exchange for Egypt allowing large numbers of Palestinians to resettle in the Sinai. But accepting such a deal would almost certainly prove to be the political suicide for el-Sisi, as he would appear towards the rest of the Arab and Islamic worlds in addition to his own people as the man who agreed to be bribed to look the other way as the final hope of an independent Palestinian state in Gaza was extinguished. And for all of those reasons, it is doubtful that Egypt will ever voluntarily open up their borders completely to all of the Palestinians within the Gaza Strip. And where so many of them will end up going when or if Israel invades the southern Gaza Strip is anybody's best guess. Meanwhile, in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, the situation is similarly growing increasingly unstable. The Israeli army has withdrawn substantial numbers of their troops from the West Bank and redeployed them to the more pressing theaters in Gaza and the northern border with Lebanon, which has given the Israeli settler militias within the West Bank more influence to do what they please. According to the United Nations figures, daily attacks from Israeli settlers on Palestinians within Area C of the West Bank have more than doubled since Hamas's attack on Israel that came on October 7th. While 2023 is looking like it will end as one of the bloodiest years on record for Palestinians within the West Bank. The hardline Israeli settlers in the West Bank who want to annex parts or all of Area C directly into Israel likely realize that their window of opportunity could be closing in the near future. As the Israeli war against Hamas in Gaza continues, the Israeli government will almost certainly face increasing pressures from abroad to restart a new diplomatic process with the Palestinians on the two-state solution. And the Palestinians and much of the rest of the world will want the Palestinian state to include the entirety of the West Bank, including Area C, where 480,000 Israeli settlers currently live. Most of the plans that are being discussed right now.
And that's the same problem you get with Ariel Sharon. There had already been settlements in Gaza. He pulled them all out in 2005. That allowed for the embedding of Hamas in that whole territory. They took over, built all these tunnels with what? The money from humanitarian aid. And if they do it here, they're going to have 800,000 people to pull out of the West Bank if they try to do the same thing. So it's not going to work out. Really quick, turn with me to Isaiah chapter 21. And we're going to start at verse 11. But Obadiah is the other thing to keep in your head the whole time we're looking at this news. So In Isaiah 21, he says, an oracle against Duma. Who is Duma? It isn't the Congress in Russia under Nicholas Romanov I. Duma is another word for Edom. Who is Edom? Esau, exactly. Esau and Ishmael combined. So it says, one calls to me from Seir, watchman, what is left of the night? Watchman, what is left of the night? The watchman said, the morning has come and the night also. If you can ask, ask and come back again. The oracle against Arabia, an oracle against Arabia. In the desert bush you will camp for the night. For caravans of Dedan, bring water for the thirsty. The inhabitants of the land of Tema met with the refugees with food. For they have fled from swords, from the drawn sword, and from the bow that is strung, and from the stress of battle. For the Lord said this to me, within 1 year, as a hired worker counts years, all the glory of Kedar will be gone. The remaining Kedarite archers will be few in number, for the Lord God of Israel has spoken to this. Now let's jump over to Obadiah 1. Can I get a reader for that? It's only one chapter.
The whole chapter?
Let's see. Trying to see. Let's read from 1 down to, gosh, it's so good, all of it. Let's stop at verse 12, I guess.
Okay. The vision of Obadiah. Thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom, we have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador is sent among the nations. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Behold, I have made thee small among the nations, thou art greatly despised. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rocks, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. If thieves came to thee, if robbers by night, how art thou cut off? Would they not have stolen till they had enough? If the grape gatherers came to thee, would they not leave some grapes? How are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. Shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men out of Edom, and understanding out of the mount of Esau? And thy mighty men, O Teman, shall be dismayed, to the end that every one of the mount of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. And in the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive, his forces and his foreigners entered into his gates and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast as one of them. But thou shouldest not have looked on the day of thy brother, and the day that he became a stranger, neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Do you want me to just read the whole thing?
Yeah, so real quick. The reason why that's so significant is because they were maculatory. They helped the Babylonians when in 586 BC, when they were extricated out of the country. They were like, go on, get out of here. It's just like the people in Germany when they carted off the Jews to the concentration camps. They were elated, overjoyed that the Jews were taken away. And God says, I'm going to punish you for this, and you're not going to exist anymore. The other thing to take out of that is I'm going to take away all of your what? Your wisdom. You're going to be dumb. You're going to make stupid decisions because I'm going to take away your intelligence to know what to do in these times. And we're seeing that. It's like, why are people making these horrible decisions? But keep reading. I particularly want to focus, so you got to read it really well, verse 18 and 19 at the end, because it's just amazing what it says. But keep going. Yep.
Thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldest not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape, neither shouldest thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. For the day of the Lord is near unto upon all the nations, as thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee, thy reward shall return upon thine own head. For as ye have drunk upon mine holy mountain, so shall all the nations drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. But upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble. And they shall kindle all them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for the Lord hath spoken.
Stop there. Unreal. What is this? What is Obadiah saying? Yeah, but they as a people extinguished. They're not going to be around anymore. It's like, where are the people from Machu Picchu? Nobody knows. There isn't anything even written. There's just some buildings on top of a mountain. Nobody has any idea what happened to them. And at least this is recorded of what's going to happen to Esau. But again, this language, I'm going to make Joseph a burning flame and Jacob a blazing fire. Where else have we heard this about the future of Israel in the minor prophets? It's in Joel, where he says, I'm going to make you a burning torch among the sheaves, and I'm going to make you a fire pot among the fuel, basically. So that is what is actually happening here. They're setting themselves up to be completely consumed by fire and devoured. And that's why Obadiah and what we're seeing here is like, you're starting to see the fusing of this prophecy and what's about to happen. We're standing at the threshold of all this unraveling and God's justice against all those who hate the Jews and hate Israel being fulfilled. And that's why Obadiah is so important. Continue.
And they of the south shall possess the mount of Esau, and they of the plain the Philistines, and they shall possess the fields of Ephraim and the fields of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead. And
okay, what does Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu say about the West Bank? What should it really be called? And about Gaza? Say it again. Judah and Samaria. What did you just read about? Wasn't it Samaria? So it's the same problem children today. What were the 5 cities of the Philistines? Asher, and there's one beginning with an E. Gosh, it's going right on. Say it again. Ashdod, yeah. So, okay, we got it. So those are the 5 cities. They're all the same territorial problems as they are today for Israel. And that's what I just want you to get. So this whole prophecy about Edom is going to come through. We can look at Joel later, but I'm running out of time. Go ahead and finish.
In the captivity of this host of the children of Israel shall possess that of the Canaanites, even unto Zarephath. And the captivity of Jerusalem, which is in Sepharad, shall possess the cities of the south. And Savior shall come up on the Mount Zion to judge the Mount of Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's.
Okay, so this is why a lot of people believe when Christ returns, he's got to come up from Tema. That's this area, in this particular area. It's also confirmed. I didn't know this because I keep badgering people with questions. I'm like, tell me where this is. It's in Habakkuk 3, and like, wasn't until I was like 54 years old I finally realized, okay, there's where it is. So it's Habakkuk 3, if you want to look at it, of Christ and the saints coming up from Tema after destroying this, after the Obadiah 1, and coming into Israel to defend them. So I'm just excited because we are very, very close to seeing all of these things fulfilled. Did you finish reading the whole thing? Okay, thank you so much, Caleb. I appreciate it. So that I want, in the context of the Bible, from what we read from Isaiah 21, from Obadiah 1, you can also look at Habakkuk 3 while you're sitting there, and also from Joel 3 and Isaiah 83 and Isaiah 63 and Psalms 83. It's recorded in all of those. They're different vantage points about the same thing. So
concerning the future of the Gaza Strip after Israel dismantles Hamas's government there involve giving control of the post-war Gaza Strip back to the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian government that currently only controls the enclaves of areas A and B in the West Bank, and the government led by the 88-year-old Mahmoud Abbas and his Fatah party that lost control over the Gaza Strip back in 2007 after Hamas ejected them. However, in exchange for accepting the return control and responsibility over the Gaza Strip following the war, it is expected that Abbas and the Palestinian Authority are likely to demand that they will also need ironclad assurances from the United States for a clear and final path towards an independent Palestinian state based on the entirety of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and probably East Jerusalem as well. And if Washington agrees, that implies that the roughly 700,000 Israeli settlers who live in the West Bank and East Jerusalem together.
So Mahmoud Abbas, 88 years old, is like, okay, I got the chance to get the Gaza Strip back, even though they're unruly and uncivilized people. But I'm going to demand from the United States that they make this ironclad that I'm going to get back all the stuff that they took in '67, the Gaza Strip, the whole West Bank, and say it with me now, Jerusalem. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they think they can do this. But if the international community turns against Israel, that is what's likely to happen. And if it happens, Israel's going to be indefensible. They'll have all the high ground, and they'll be operating in this Swiss cheese environment that we talked about as part of the 48 partition.
Would have to be mass evacuated into Israel proper. And thus, with a large amount of the Israeli military now moved out of the West Bank to focus on all the other fronts, the Israeli settlers and militias in Area C are sensing that in order to keep their colonies within Israel in the future, they must act now before a ceasefire or peace agreement is made that might surrender Area C for good. From their perspective, perhaps, by forcibly pushing as many Palestinians as they can from Area C into the enclaves of Areas A and B or into neighboring Jordan. And if the violence in the West Bank between the settlers and the Palestinians continues to escalate amidst the ongoing war in Gaza, it might eventually become enough to trigger a third intifada or uprising from among the 3 million Palestinians who live across the entire West Bank. An uprising that would likely involve attacks on Israeli settlements in Area C and attacks across the West Bank into Israel proper. A full-blown Palestinian insurgency exploding in the West Bank like this before the war in Gaza is even finished would likely force the Israelis to redeploy some of their forces away from Gaza and back towards the West Bank to suppress it. Because if the uprising got more radical, it would trigger one of Israel's greatest geographic fears. Ever since Israel's founding in 1948, the country has been very wary of any hostile power acquiring control over the West Bank, because it includes a series of highly elevated hills that overlook Israel's lower elevation and narrow coastal plain. While Israel's self-declared capital and most well-known city is Jerusalem, Israel's actual civilizational core is located here across the narrow and low coastal plain between the Mediterranean Sea and the hills of the West.
So you all know how to read a topo map, right? Everybody know how to read a topo map? What is the area of the West Bank compared with the Swiss cheese of Israel? Is elevation-wise, it's a lot higher. Does that make it easier to fire rockets? If you're firing from a valley up to a mountaintop, that's pretty hard. But when you're firing from a mountain down to the valley, you can't miss. It's very precarious for Israel.
West Bank. This narrow coastal plain includes the Tel Aviv metropolitan area right here, which is a region that is also known in Hebrew as Gush Dan. Gush Dan is home to more than 4,150,000 people today, which is about 44% of the entire Israeli population all on its own. Gush Dan further represents roughly half of the entire Israeli economy. And so, despite Jerusalem being the country's political and religious capital, Tel Aviv is the country's economic, commercial, cultural, and industrial core. And tragically, for the fates of millions of people throughout history, Israel's narrowest geographic point is also just to the north of the Gush Dan region here, in between the West Bank and the Mediterranean Sea. This gap is less than 9 miles wide. And so, if the West Bank was fully under the control of an organization that was hostile to Israel, such as Hamas, it would only take an advance of about 9 miles for an invasion force to completely sever Israel into 2 separate geographic halves. And for reference, during the October 7th attack, Hamas was able to punch into Israel nearly 14 miles deep at their furthest advance. Had the same...
How long did it take the Palestinians to do that 14-mile advance into Israel? less than a day, less than a day. So what the point is here, if this becomes a two-state solution, they won't even have 9 miles of buffer zone. It'll be the edge of another nation and the ocean. It's going to be a very narrow strip of land. So
Same thing happened out of the West Bank. Israel could have been split into two, while militants could have been attacking the downtown core of Tel Aviv itself. And so, in order to increase their strategic depth further away from the coastal plain, and in order to deny an enemy the use of the high ground immediately facing the coastal plain, Israel has long considered their continued control, or at least influence over the West Bank, to be a geographically vital strategy to maintain, even if the rest of the outside world considers it to be illegal and condemns them for it, which is Israel's strategic rationale for having allowed hundreds of thousands of settlers to live in the West Bank, and why Israel would immediately respond to a large-scale Palestinian insurgency erupting in the West Bank that could potentially catapult a new, more hostile government into areas A and B there. Such an event taking place would also be a terrifying prospect for the neighboring Hashemite kingdom of Jordan to witness as well. Because of previous history, Jordan is already the home of the largest number of Palestinian refugees and their descendants anywhere in the world, nearly 2.2 million of them. These Palestinian refugees already make up about 20% of the kingdom's entire population, and they aren't even the only refugees present here either. Jordan is also home to nearly 800,000 more refugees from Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Sudan, bringing the total number of refugees present within the country today to around 3 million, out of a total population of only 11.4 million. This means that Jordan already has the second highest number of refugees per capita of any country in the world. And that means they are looking at the situation in the neighboring West Bank and the Gaza Strip with a very high degree of alarm, as Israel has already ordered more than 1 million Palestinians to evacuate from the northern Gaza Strip, and speculation runs rampant about more potentially being evacuated into Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. Jordan's principal fear right now is that if the situation worsens in the West Bank as well, up to 3 million of the Palestinians who live there might be pushed out into Jordan. And if that happens, the country would shatter. With so many refugees already present in the country, a sudden large influx of even more would strain Jordan's resources to the breaking point, which would be a similarly terrifying prospect to Saudi Arabia as well, since dramatically increased instability in Jordan, from millions of Palestinian refugees fleeing or being pushed into both of them, would directly threaten one of the Saudi kingdom's most ambitious mega projects going on right nearby, NEO, the $500 billion futuristic linear city that they are building immediately adjacent to Jordan and the Sinai Peninsula. Jordan and Saudi Arabia have therefore each made it extremely clear that any expulsion of Palestinians from the West Bank into Jordan will be a very firm red line for Israel not to cross, that could even jeopardize the previously agreed upon peace treaties between Israel and Egypt and Jordan. And then, looming all around Israel.
Okay, well, we'll pick up this next time because the next party he's talking about is Iran. Yes, Martha? Yeah. Yes. So that, I know, the Hashemite dynasty is very threatened by them because they could easily topple their own government. So thank you for your time.